The bright studio lights shone down on John Peterson as he adjusted his blue tie and checked his reflection one last time. Tonight was going to be a big show. The producers had finally managed to book Carol Bennett as a guest. John smiled too. Himself, Carol was smart, quick-witted, and never afraid to speak her mind. Their on-screen chemistry always led to good ratings. 5 minutes, Mr. Peterson, called out Samantha, the floor manager. She was always professional, clipboard in hand, making sure everything ran smoothly. John nodded and took a sip of water. The Evening with John show had been running for 6 years now. What had started as a small political talk show had grown into one of the most watched programs in its time slot. John was proud of what he had built. He knew people tuned in for his straight talking, style, and willingness to ask the tough questions others avoided. On the other side of the studio, Carol Bennett was getting her makeup touched up. At 52, Carol had spent nearly 3 decades in the news business. She had started as a local reporter in a small town in Ohio before working her way up to become one of the most recognized faces in news. 3 years ago, she had left her anchor position to start her own show, Bennett Speaks, where she offered her takes on politics and current events. "How are you feeling tonight?" asked the makeup artist as she applied a light dusting of powder. "Ready for battle," Carol replied with a smile. She always enjoyed her appearances on John's show. Though they often disagreed politically, she respected his intelligence and fairness. Unlike many hosts, John actually listened to his guests instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. Carol opened her leather portfolio and glanced again at the notes she had prepared. Tonight, they were supposed to discuss the upcoming election, the new education bill, and Patricia Adams' latest book. Carol had done her homework as always, but there was something else on her mind. Something she had discovered just 2 days ago that she wasn't sure if she should bring up on air. The information had come from an unexpected source, a former accountant at the Patricia Adams Foundation who had reached out to Carol's team with concerns. At first, Carol had been skeptical. Patricia Adams, the former First Lady, was widely admired for her charity work. Her foundation had raised millions for education programs in underserved communities. But the documents the accountant had provided showed troubling patterns that Carol couldn't ignore. 2 minutes, everyone," Samantha called out. The studio audience of about 100 people settled into their seats. The show always began with John doing a short monologue before welcoming his guests. Tonight, besides Carol, there would be a senator and a popular author discussing their new book. John stepped onto his mark and adjusted his earpiece. He could hear the director counting down in his ear. "And we're living 5, 4, 3. The last 2 numbers were silent, just fingers held up, and then the red light on the camera lit up. "Good evening, America," John greeted with his signature smile. "We've got a packed show for you tonight. Later, we'll be talking with Senator Bill Harris about the infrastructure bill and novelist Kate Murphy about her bestseller. But first, please welcome someone who needs no introduction, the host of Bennett Speaks and my favorite sparring partner, Carol Bennett." The audience applauded as Carol walked onto the set, waving and smiling. She and John exchanged a quick hug before sitting down in the comfortable leather chairs that faced each other. "Carol, always a pleasure to have you here," John said warmly. "Always a pleasure to be here, John, even though I know you're going to try to corner me on the tax proposal," Carol replied with a good-natured laugh. "You know me too well," John admitted. "But before we get into that, I want to talk about the election. We're 6 months out, and things are heating up. Your thoughts on the latest polls?" For the next 15 minutes, they discussed the upcoming election. As always, their conversation was lively but respectful. Even when they disagreed, which was often, there was an underlying sense of mutual respect that the audience appreciated. During the commercial break, the makeup artist rushed in for touch-ups. John leaned over to Carol. "Good segment," he said. "You always keep me on my toes." Carol smiled but seemed distracted. John, there's something I've been debating whether to bring up. John raised an eyebrow. Oh, sounds serious. It is. It's about Patricia Adams. John looked surprised. What about her? We were going to discuss her new book briefly, but if you have something else, double quotes, Carol hesitated. I received some documents about her foundation. Financial records that don't add up. Now John was fully attentive. What kind of records? Transaction histories, internal memos, emails. They suggest money is being moved through shell companies before reaching the actual charitable programs. A lot of money. John frowned. That's a serious allegation. Are you sure about the source? It was an accountant who worked for the foundation. For 6 years, he has no obvious reason to lie. And the documents look authentic. Before they could discuss further, Samantha was counting down again. Back in 10 seconds. As the red light came back on, John smoothly transitioned to their next planned topic. But his mind was racing. Unknown to Carol, he had also been looking into the Patricia Adams Foundation for a segment planned for next month. One of his researchers had flagged some unusual connections between foundation grants and businesses owned by friends of the Adams family. While discussing the education bill, John found himself thinking about the folder in his office. It contained records of 3 major grants that had gone to companies with ties to Adams' brother-in-law. Nothing definitive, but enough to raise questions. And what do you think about the funding provisions, Carol? John asked, bringing himself back to the present discussion. Carol provided her analysis, but John could tell her heart wasn't in it either. Her eyes kept drifting to her portfolio, which John now suspected contained the documents she had mentioned. When they broke for the next commercial, John made a quick decision. How confident are you in these documents? He asked Carol quietly. Confident enough that I've had my team verifying them for the past 48 hours, she replied. The patterns are clear. John nodded slowly. I've been working on something similar, not ready to air yet, but interesting timing. Carol's eyes widened slightly. You too, what have you found? As they quickly shared notes, both realized they were looking at different pieces of the same puzzle. John's information about the grant recipients complemented Carol's findings about the financial pathways. We shouldn't do this now, Carol said, though her voice lacked conviction. We don't have all the facts. John looked at her intently. We have enough to ask the questions. Isn't that our job? Samantha was approaching again. 30 seconds. Carol and John exchanged a long look. Years of journalistic instinct warred with caution. Finally, Carol nodded slightly. Follow my lead when we get back, John said quietly. As the camera's red light came back on. Neither of them knew exactly how the next segment would unfold, but both felt the weight of the moment. Sometimes in journalism, opportunities appeared unexpectedly. This was one of those moments when they had to decide whether to play it safe or take a risk in pursuit of the truth. John took a deep breath and faced the camera. Welcome back. Before we bring out our next guest, Carol and I want to discuss something that has recently come to both our attentions. It concerns the Patricia Adams Foundation and some financial questions that deserve answers. The control room erupted in confusion as the show veered off script, but the cameras kept rolling. What happened next would change both their careers forever. The studio fell silent as John's words hung in the air. Even the audience seemed to sense that something unplanned was happening. In the control room, the producer, Frank Wilson, pressed his headset closer to his ear. What is he doing? Frank asked no one in particular. This isn't on the schedule. On the studio floor, Samantha looked down at her clipboard in confusion. There was nothing about the Patricia Adams Foundation on tonight's agenda. She caught the eye of the director, who shrugged. They both knew that once John got that particular look in his eyes, there was no stopping him. As some of you may know, John continued, his voice steady, The Patricia Adams Foundation has raised over $300 million in the past 5 years for education initiatives. It's been praised as one of the most successful charitable organizations in the country. Carol nodded, her expression serious. Yes, and Patricia Adams herself has become a symbol of giving back. Her foundation promises that 95% of all donations go directly to programs that help children. John reached under his desk and pulled out a blue folder. This was the file he had mentioned to Carol during the break. He hadn't planned to use it tonight, but the moment felt right. "Carol, I understand you've been doing some research into the foundation's finances," John said, giving her an opening. Carol took a deep breath. She had spent years building her reputation as a serious journalist. What she was about to do could risk everything she had worked for. But she also remembered why she became a journalist in the first place: to uncover the truth. "Yes, John. 2 days ago, I received documents from a former accountant at the Patricia Adams Foundation," Carol explained. She opened her portfolio and removed several papers. "These records show something troubling. Money from the foundation doesn't go directly to educational programs as claimed. Instead, it passes through a series of shell companies before reaching its final destination." In the control room, phones were already ringing. Frank grabbed one. "Yes, sir, I understand they're off script," he said to the network executive on the other end. "No, sir, I didn't know about this in advance." Back on set, John was nodding. "That's interesting, Carol, because my team has been looking into the grant recipients." He opened his folder and pulled out a document with several names highlighted. 3 of the largest grants last year, totaling $45 million, went to companies with direct ties to Patricia Adams' brother-in-law, Richard Foster. The camera operator zoomed in on the document, capturing the highlighted names. The director, realizing the significance of what was happening, signaled for a split-screen view showing both hosts and the documents they were discussing. "John, are you saying these companies are owned by Richard Foster?" Carol asked. "Not directly owned," John clarified. "But he sits on the board of all 3 and holds significant stock in each one. What's more interesting is that these companies don't actually run educational programs themselves. They act as consultants and program managers who then hire other companies to do the actual work." Carol's eyes widened slightly. This information connected perfectly with what she had discovered. So the money flows from donors to the foundation, then to these companies connected to Foster, and then to other companies before finally reaching the actual programs. "Exactly," John confirmed. "And at each step, management fees are taken out." Samantha was now frantically waving from off-camera, drawing a finger across her throat in the universal sign to cut. The commercial break was overdue, but neither host acknowledged her signals. Carol turned to face the camera directly. "Let me be clear about what this means. When the foundation claims that 95% of donations go to programs, they're counting money given to these shell companies as program expenses. But our research suggests that after all the management fees at each level, only about 60% actually funds educational services." John nodded. "And that's a very different picture than what donors believe they're supporting." In the audience, people were leaning forward in their seats. Some were taking notes on their phones. A few reporters who had come to watch the show live were already typing furiously on their devices. "John, I want to show viewers something else," Carol said, pulling out another document. "This is an internal memo from the Foundation's finance department from last year. It specifically instructs staff to classify all transfers to these management companies as direct program expenses in public reports." The camera zoomed in on the memo. The director, now fully committed to this unexpected segment, made sure viewers could clearly see the highlighted section Carol was referring to. "Now I want to be fair here," John said, always careful to present a balanced view. "There's nothing illegal about hiring management companies to oversee programs. Many large foundations do this. That's true, Carol agreed. But the issue is transparency. Donors are being told their money goes directly to help children, when in reality, a significant portion is being diverted to companies with family connections. And these companies appear to be charging unusually high fees for their services. In the control room, Frank was now on the phone with the network's legal department. Yes, they have documents. No, I haven't vetted them. He paused, listening. I understand the legal risks, but they're live. I can't just cut the feed without causing an even bigger story. Back on set, John was going deeper into the financial trail. According to my research, one of these companies, Educational Futures, received $18 million from the foundation last year. But financial records show they spent only $7 million on actual educational programs. The rest went to administrative costs and consulting fees. Carol nodded. And Educational Futures is run by Steve Mason, who used to work for Richard Foster at his private equity firm. The connections are hard to ignore. The red light on the main camera began blinking. A 5-second warning that they were finally going to commercial break, whether the hosts were ready or not. We'll continue this discussion after the break, John said smoothly, recognizing the signal. And we'll explore what these findings mean for the foundation and its work. As soon as the on-air light went off, the studio erupted in activity. Samantha rushed over to John and Carol, her face a mix of panic and awe. What are you two doing? She hissed. The executive producer is going crazy. The network president is on the phone. John remained calm. Tell them we're doing our jobs. This is a legitimate story backed by documents and sources. Carol was checking her phone, which had exploded with notifications. It's already spreading on social media. People are demanding responses from the foundation. Frank hurried onto the set, his face red with stress. The foundation's spokesperson is calling. They're demanding equal time to respond. And the network is worried about legal exposure. John nodded. Good. Tell them we welcome their response. We can adjust the schedule to accommodate them. Carol looked at John. They both knew they had just changed the course of the show and possibly their careers. There would be no going back to the planned segments now. The story had taken on a life of its own. Are you sure about your sources? John asked Carol quietly as makeup artists rushed in for touch-ups. Absolutely, she replied without hesitation. Are you? Yes, John said, but we've just made some powerful enemies. Carol smiled slightly. That's how you know you're doing journalism right. The floor director began counting down to the end of the commercial break. In 30 seconds, they would be back on air, continuing a story that neither of them had planned to tell tonight. But now that they had started, they were determined to see it through, wherever it might lead them. The cameras turned back on, and millions of viewers across America watched as John and Carol continued their unexpected investigation. The planned guests for the evening, Senator Bill Harris and author Kate Murphy, had been quickly informed they would be bumped to a future show. Neither complained after learning what was unfolding on air. Welcome back, John said, his voice steady despite the chaos that had erupted during the commercial break. If you're just joining us, Carol Bennett and I are discussing some concerning financial patterns we've discovered regarding the Patricia Adams Foundation. Carol nodded, her expression serious but confident. Before the break, we were explaining how money flows through several companies with connections to Patricia Adams' family members before reaching actual educational programs. John turned slightly to address the audience directly. We want to be very clear. We're not claiming anyone has broken the law. What we are questioning is whether donors are being given an accurate picture of how their money is being used. In homes across the country, viewers were calling friends and family, telling them to turn on the show. Social media was exploding, with comments, shares, and heated debates. The hashtag Adams Foundation was trending within minutes. Let's go deeper into these financial connections, Carol said. She held up another document from her portfolio. This is a list of board members for the 3 main companies that received the largest grants from the foundation. 7 out of 12. Board members across these companies have direct personal or business ties to the Adams family. The camera zoomed in on the document as Carol pointed out the names. The director, now fully committed to this impromptu investigative segment, made sure viewers could clearly see each connection Carol was highlighting. And this matters because? John asked, setting up Carol to explain the significance. It matters because when a charity directs funds to companies controlled by family and friends, there needs to be exceptional transparency and oversight, Carol explained in simple terms. Our research suggests that this oversight is lacking. In the control room, Frank was juggling phone calls from network executives, legal advisors, and now reporters from other news outlets asking for comment. The show's social media team reported that viewership was spiking dramatically, with more people tuning in by the minute. We've also learned something interesting about the timing of some of these grants, John said, pulling out another document. From his folder, 3 major grants, totaling $27 million, were awarded to these companies just 2 weeks after Patricia Adams announced her new book tour. The book, as you know, focuses heavily on her charitable work. Carol raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting the grants were timed to coincide with the book release for publicity? I'm not suggesting anything, John replied carefully. I'm simply pointing out the timing. But what's more interesting is that according to financial filings, these companies spent less than half of those grant amounts on actual programs during the 6 months that followed. At Patricia Adams' home in Georgetown, the former First Lady was watching the broadcast in stunned silence. Her phone was ringing non-stop. Her publicist, her lawyer, her family members, everyone wanted to know how to respond. Patricia herself could hardly believe what she was seeing. The foundation had been her pride, her legacy after leaving the White House. Now, on live television, it was being portrayed as something very different from what she had intended. Back in the studio, a production assistant hurried onto the set during a brief moment when the cameras were focused on the documents. She handed Samantha a note, who then quickly passed it to John. I've just been informed, John said, looking up from the note, that the Patricia Adams Foundation has issued a statement. They deny any wrongdoing and say they maintain the highest standards of financial transparency. They've offered to send a representative to appear on our show to address these questions. Carol nodded. We welcome that. This is not about attacking anyone. It's about understanding how one of our country's most prominent charities operates. In her Washington office, Linda Morrison, the CEO of the Patricia Adams Foundation, was in crisis mode. She had gathered her senior staff, the foundation's lawyers, and their public relations team. On a large screen, they watched John and Carol methodically laying out financial connections that the foundation had never publicly disclosed. How do they have these documents? Linda asked sharply, pointing at the internal memo Carol had shown earlier. That was never meant for public view. No one had an answer. The team was frantically preparing talking points, legal responses, and damage control strategies. The foundation's phone lines were jammed with calls from donors, partners, and reporters. Back on the show, John and Carol were now discussing the foundation's programs themselves. One thing that stands out in our research, Carol said, is that while the foundation claims to have helped over 2 million children, independent evaluations of their programs are hard to find. The numbers they publish come from their own internal assessments, John nodded. And when my team requested more detailed impact reports, we were told they were confidential. That's unusual for a public charity of this size. The show's producers had adjusted quickly to the unfolding story. Graphics teams were creating visual aids to help viewers understand the complex financial relationships being described. Researchers We're feeding additional information to John and Carol through their earpieces, verifying facts in real time. We should also mention, Carol added, that several former employees of the foundation reached out to my team after hearing rumors of our investigation. 3 of them described a culture where questioning financial decisions was strongly discouraged. In living rooms across America, viewers were glued to their screens. The raw, unscripted nature of the segment made for compelling television. People were watching journalism happen in real time, seeing 2 respected media figures risk their reputations to bring a story to light. I think it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture, John said, sensing they needed to provide context. Charitable foundations do vital work in our society. When they operate with true transparency, they can transform lives. What we're questioning is whether this particular foundation is living up to the standards it claims to uphold. Carol nodded in agreement. Exactly, this isn't about politics. It's about accountability. When people donate money believing it will directly help children, they deserve to know exactly how that money is being used. As they continued their discussion, neither John nor Carol noticed that the show had already run 15 minutes over its scheduled end time. The network, seeing the extraordinary viewership numbers, had made the decision to let the program continue and delay the following show. In the Patricia Adams Foundation offices, the crisis team was divided. Some wanted to demand the network cut the broadcast immediately. Others argued they should accept the offer to appear on the show and present their side. Linda Morrison stared at the screen, watching as years of carefully crafted public image unraveled in real time. We need to hear from someone with direct knowledge of these financial arrangements, John was saying on screen. And as luck would have it, we may have that opportunity. The camera panned out to reveal that a new chair had been added to the set. John turned to the audience. After the break, we'll be joined by someone with first-hand knowledge of the foundation's financial practices. Stay with us. As they cut to commercial, the studio buzzed with tension and excitement. The production team had pulled off something nearly impossible in television, completely restructuring a live show on the fly while maintaining professional standards. Who's coming on? Carol asked John quietly, surprised by his announcement. The accountant who sent you the documents, John replied. Our producer reached him during the last break. He's agreed to appear, though not on camera. We'll have him in shadow with his voice disguised. Carol's eyes widened. That's a huge risk for him. John nodded solemnly. He knows, but he said after seeing us put our careers on the line, he couldn't stay silent. As makeup artists touched up their appearance for the next segment, both hosts knew they had crossed a point of no return. Whatever happened next would forever change their careers, the Patricia Adams Foundation, and perhaps the way Americans viewed charitable organizations. Altogether, the tension in the studio was electric as they prepared to return from the commercial break. The technical team had worked quickly to set up a special area where their surprise guest could speak without being identified. A screen had been placed on set where only a dark silhouette would be visible. Are you sure about this? Frank asked John through his earpiece. Having an anonymous source on live TV is risky. He's not anonymous to us, John replied quietly. We've verified his identity and his employment history. He just can't show his face due to legal concerns. The floor director began the countdown. Back in 5, 4, 3... The last numbers were silent, just fingers in the air, and then the red camera light came on again. Welcome back to this special extended edition of Evening with John, John said to the camera. Tonight, Carol Bennett and I have been discussing our findings regarding the Patricia Adams Foundation and questions about how donation money is being used. Carol nodded. We've shown documents that suggest a significant portion of the foundation's funds pass through companies with connections to Patricia Adams family members before reaching actual educational programs. And now, John continued, We're joined by someone with direct knowledge of these financial practices. For legal reasons, we're protecting his identity." The camera panned to show the silhouette on the screen. The voice that came through had been digitally altered to sound deeper than normal. "Thank you for having me," the disguised voice said. "Until 3 months ago, I worked as a senior accountant at the Patricia Adams Foundation. I left because of what I saw happening with the foundation's finances." "Can you explain what concerned you?" Carol asked. "I was responsible for tracking grant disbursements," the voice explained. "Over time, I noticed that large grants were repeatedly going to the same few companies. When I researched these companies, I discovered they were connected to Richard Foster, Patricia Adams' brother-in-law." John leaned forward. "Was this common knowledge within the foundation?" "Among senior staff, yes. There was an unwritten rule not to discuss these connections publicly. When donors would ask for detailed breakdowns of how their money was spent, we were instructed to provide only high-level summaries." Across town, in her elegant Georgetown home, Patricia Adams watched with growing horror. Her husband, former Senator Jack Adams, sat beside her, his face grim. "Call Richard," Patricia said. Sharply, "I want to know exactly what's been happening with these companies." Back in the studio, Carol was asking the whistleblower more questions. "In your professional opinion, was the foundation misleading donors about how their money was being used?" There was a pause before the disguised voice answered. "The foundation told donors that 95% of their money went to programs helping children. Technically, that money did go to programs, but those programs were run by these connected companies, which took large fees before passing the remaining funds to actual educational services." "And how much actually reached the children?" John asked. "Based on my calculations, between 55 and 65% of donation money. The rest was consumed by various management fees, consulting fees, and administrative costs at each level." In homes across America, viewers were stunned. The Patricia Adams Foundation had been featured in countless positive news stories. Patricia herself had received humanitarian awards for her charitable work. Now a very different picture was emerging. "Did you bring these concerns to anyone's attention?" Carol asked. "I raised questions to my supervisor and eventually to Linda Morrison, the CEO," the voice explained. "I was told these arrangements had been approved by the board and were perfectly legal. Shortly after, I was moved to a different department with less access to the complete financial picture." John checked his notes. "We've tried to contact other former employees of the foundation. Several declined to speak with us, citing non-disclosure agreements." "Did you sign such an agreement?" "Yes, all employees do. I'm breaking that agreement by speaking with you now because I believe the public has a right to know how their charitable donations are being used." In the control room, Frank was monitoring social media reactions. The story was exploding online. News sites were already posting articles based on what had been revealed so far. The network's website was experiencing record traffic as people searched for more information. Carol addressed the whistleblower again. "Do you have any reason to believe Patricia Adams herself was directly involved in creating these financial arrangements?" The silhouette shifted slightly. "I never saw evidence that she managed the day-to-day finances, but it's hard to imagine she was unaware of where such large sums of money were going, especially when her own family members were involved." At the Patricia Adams Foundation headquarters, Linda Morrison's phone rang. She checked the caller ID and took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, Patricia, I'm watching it right now," she said. "We're preparing a response." "No, I don't know who the accountant is. We have legal reviewing options as we speak." Back on the set, John was showing another document to the camera. "This appears to be an internal memo from 2 years ago," John said. "It discusses ways to maintain confidentiality regarding partner organizations. Can you explain what this means?" That memo came after a major donor asked for a detailed breakdown of how their $10 million gift was being spent. The disguised voice explained. The leadership was concerned about revealing the full chain of companies involved. That memo instructed staff on how to provide technically accurate but incomplete information. Carol looked directly at the camera. We want to be fair in our reporting. The Patricia Adams Foundation has offered to send a representative to respond to these allegations. We've agreed to have them on tomorrow night's show. In the Patricia Adams household, the phone was ringing constantly. Patricia's publicist, her lawyer, the foundation's board members, everyone wanted to speak with her. Patricia herself sat stunned, watching as the reputation she had spent years building crumbled on national television. "Jack," she said to her husband, "did you know about Richard's companies receiving foundation money?" Jack Adams looked uncomfortable. "I knew he had some business connection to the foundation, but not the details. You always said you left the financial decisions to Linda and the board." Patricia closed her eyes. She had indeed delegated most of the foundation's operations. She had been the public face, the inspirational leader, the person who cut ribbons and gave speeches. Had she been too removed from the actual management? In the studio, the interview with the whistleblower was wrapping up. "One final question," John said. "What do you hope will happen as a result of coming forward?" The disguised voice was quiet for a moment. "I believe in the mission of helping children get better education. I hope the foundation will become truly transparent and ensure that donation money actually reaches those who need it most. The programs themselves do good work. They just need to be funded honestly." As the interview ended, John turned to face the camera. "We want to thank our anonymous source for his courage in speaking with us tonight. We also want to acknowledge that we've presented serious allegations that deserve a response from the Patricia Adams Foundation." Carol nodded. "We're committed to fair and accurate reporting. Tomorrow night, we'll hear the foundation side of this story." The show's regular closing music began to play over 3 hours after the program had begun. What had started as a typical episode had transformed into one of the most significant live investigative reports in recent television history. As the cameras turned off, John and Carol sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. The studio crew moved around them, some offering quiet congratulations, others looking worried about potential fallout. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Carol asked softly. John looked at her. "I think we did what journalists are supposed to do. The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary." Outside the studio, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, having heard about the explosive broadcast. News vans from competing networks lined the street. The story was no longer just theirs. It now belonged to the world. In her office, Linda Morrison stared at her phone. She had just received a text message from Patricia Adams. "How could you let this happen?" Linda had no good answer. The carefully constructed image they had maintained for years had been shattered in a single evening. Tomorrow they would try to mount a defense, but she knew some things couldn't be explained away. The truth, once revealed, had a power all its own. The morning after the broadcast, John woke up early. He had barely slept. His phone had been buzzing with messages all night, and he had finally turned it off around 2 a.m. Now, as sunlight streamed through his bedroom window, he turned it back on. Immediately, it began buzzing again. Missed calls, text messages, emails, all wanting his response to what people were calling the television moment of the year. Across town, Carol was already up and dressed. She sat at her kitchen table, drinking coffee and reading through the morning's news coverage. Every major outlet had picked up the story. Some praised her and John for their courage. Others questioned their methods and timing. A few suggested they had political motives for targeting Patricia Adams. Carol sighed. She had expected this part, the attempt to make a story Above financial transparency into something political. At the network headquarters, security had been increased. A small group of protesters had gathered outside, holding signs supporting Patricia Adams. News vans lined the street, with reporters doing live stand-ups for morning shows. Inside, network executives were meeting to discuss how to handle tonight's follow-up broadcast. "The ratings were extraordinary," said Alan Barnes, the network president. "But we need to be careful. The foundation's lawyers have already contacted U.S. demanding equal time and threatening legal action." Frank nodded. John and Carol verified their sources and documents. "We stand behind their reporting." "Yes, but we need to be absolutely fair tonight," Alan insisted. "The foundation gets their full chance to respond." By mid-morning, Patricia Adams had finally released a public statement. It was carefully worded, expressing shock at the allegations and promising a full internal review of the foundation's practices. She neither admitted wrongdoing nor directly denied the specific claims made on the show. In a downtown office building, Richard Foster, Patricia's brother-in-law, was meeting with his own team of lawyers. His phone had been ringing constantly since the broadcast. "This is a witch hunt," he said angrily. "Yes, my companies received grants from the foundation. But everything was approved by the board. Everything was legal." One of the lawyers looked uncomfortable. "The issue isn't just legality, Mr. Foster. It's about public perception. The appearance of a conflict of interest can be just as damaging as an actual conflict." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Those companies do good work. We've helped thousands of kids at very generous management fees," another lawyer noted quietly. Back at his apartment, John was preparing for tonight's broadcast. His producer had confirmed that Linda Morrison, CEO of the Patricia Adams Foundation, would appear on the show to respond to the allegations. John was reviewing his notes, preparing questions that would be firm but fair. His phone rang. It was Carol. "Have you seen the latest?" she asked without greeting. "No, what happened?" "Two more whistleblowers have come forward," Carol explained. "Former employees of the foundation. They've contacted other news outlets with similar stories about the financial arrangements." John sat down heavily on his couch. "This is getting bigger than we expected." "There's more," Carol continued. "One of the major donors to the foundation, Bill Raymond, has announced he's suspending his annual $5 million contribution pending an independent audit." This was significant news. Bill Raymond was a well-respected philanthropist whose support had given the foundation additional credibility. At the Patricia Adams Foundation offices, chaos reigned. Staff members were fielding non-stop calls from donors, partners, and the media. Some employees looked shell-shocked, learning about their organization's financial practices for the first time through the broadcast. Others huddled in small groups, whispering about whether they had suspected something all along. Linda Morrison was in her office with the foundation's legal and PR teams, preparing for her appearance on John's show that evening. "Remember, stick to the talking points," the PR director advised. "Emphasize the good work the foundation has done. Don't get drawn into details about the financial structures." Linda nodded, though she looked uncertain. She had been CEO for 5 years. The financial arrangements with Richard Foster's companies had been in place before she arrived, but she had continued them without question. Now she wondered if that had been a mistake. By late afternoon, Patricia Adams had made a decision. Against the advice of her lawyers and publicist, she called the network. "I want to appear on the show myself," she told Alan Barnes. "Not Linda, me." Alan was surprised but quickly agreed. Patricia Adams appearing in person would make for even more compelling television. When John received the news, he immediately called Carol. "Patricia is coming on instead of Linda," he told her. "This changes everything. She's taking a huge risk," Carol observed. "But it might be her only option to save the foundation's reputation." As evening approached, the studio was even more heavily secured than usual. Patricia Adams arrived through a back entrance, avoiding the crowds of reporters and onlookers outside. She was accompanied only by a single assistant, having decided against bringing lawyers or PR people. In the green room, John went to meet her before the show. Despite their professional differences, he had always respected her work. "Mrs. Adams," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Patricia shook his hand firmly. "I believe in facing challenges directly, Mr. Peterson. The format tonight will be straightforward," John explained. "You'll have time to respond to the allegations, and then I'll ask some questions. We're not looking to ambush you." Patricia nodded. "I appreciate that. I have nothing to hide." The show began precisely at 8 p.m. The usual opening music played. And then John appeared on screen, his expression serious. "Good evening. Last night on this program, my colleague Carol Bennett and I presented information raising questions about the financial practices of the Patricia Adams Foundation. Tonight, we're honored to have former First Lady Patricia Adams herself joining us to respond to those questions." The camera panned to show Patricia, sitting tall and composed in a blue suit. She looked directly into the camera as John introduced her. "Mrs. Adams, thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to what was discussed on yesterday's program." Patricia took a deep breath. "Thank you, John. First, I want to say that I have dedicated the past 7 years of my life to helping children get better educational opportunities. That mission is deeply personal to me." She paused briefly before continuing. "After watching your program last night, I was shocked and deeply concerned. While I have always been involved in the Foundation's public work, I delegated much of the financial management to others. That was a mistake for which I take full responsibility." In living rooms across America, viewers leaned forward, surprised by her candor. Many had expected denials or legal defenses. "This morning," Patricia continued, "I ordered a complete independent audit of the Foundation. I've asked for the resignation of several board members who approved these financial arrangements, and I've instructed our team to create a new system of financial transparency where every dollar can be tracked from donation to its final use." John looked surprised. "That's a significant response, Mrs. Adams. Are you acknowledging that the financial practices described on our show were accurate?" Patricia met his gaze steadily. "I'm acknowledging that our donors and the public deserve better than what they've received. Whether every detail reported was accurate will be determined by the independent audit. But the core issue, that too much money was being directed through companies with family connections, appears to be true. And that is unacceptable." For the next hour, Patricia answered questions with remarkable openness. She admitted she should have been more involved in the Foundation's operations. She revealed that she had spoken with her brother-in-law Richard, who had agreed to step down from his company's boards. She announced plans to restructure the entire organization. As the show neared its end, John asked one final question. "Mrs. Adams, why did you choose to come here tonight yourself, rather than sending your CEO or legal team?" Patricia smiled slightly. "Because when something goes wrong in an organization that bears your name, you don't hide behind others. You take responsibility. The Foundation's work is too important to let it be destroyed by mistakes, even if they weren't my direct doing." When the broadcast ended, something unexpected happened. The studio audience rose to their feet in applause, not for John, but for Patricia Adams. Her honesty and willingness to take responsibility had earned their respect. In the weeks and months that followed, the Patricia Adams Foundation underwent a complete transformation. The independent audit confirmed most of the financial issues John and Carol had identified. Several board members resigned. Richard Foster's companies were removed from all Foundation programs. Most importantly, a new system of radical transparency was implemented. Donors could now track their contributions through an online portal, seeing exactly how every dollar was spent. 1 year after the broadcast, Patricia Adams appeared again on John's show, this time for a friendly interview about the foundation's reforms. The organization was smaller now, but more focused and effective. And donations were actually increasing as public trust was restored. For John and Carol, the story had changed their careers. They received journalism awards for their investigation,